Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. We're glad you decided to check us out. God has a specific message of hope for your life and mine today. So listen up.
Besides Bay West and all the churches that we know about in Palm Bay that are worshiping this morning, a new church is starting New church is starting in Port Orange today. And we had, if you remember back in November, we had Pastor Chris Height come and share with us the vision for what they're going to be doing at a new work in Port Orange. Bruce and Valerie went up to support them today. And just be in prayer, because right now they're in the middle of their service as well. And hopefully God is doing wonderful and amazing things there, and as He's going to be doing here. This weekend we were supposed to do. We were actually supposed to be having a one-on-one with God conference this weekend. And hopefully you didn't get. I sent out every piece of communication that I possibly could send out. When I found out on Monday that one of our speakers was having some health issues that was requiring some surgery, and we had to cancel that. Well, postpone it. We're going to bring it back. It's going to be coming back in March. Is where we're coming back. We're going to make a clean break, ramp back up to it in March, and come. But it offered an interesting opportunity for today. In the message, there's something that's been on my heart for a while that I've been struggling with back and forth. You probably have too. If you've been looking at social media, or if you've been looking at the news or things that are going on, this last week, there were about 140 young women accompanied by their coaches and their parents that stood in a court in Michigan to face Dr. Larry Nassar, who was the U.S. Olympic team doctor for many, many years. And the reason that they were there was to confront him, because he had used his position over many years to sexually abuse all of these women. And these from young girls who are now grown up to be women, some of them for years. Is sometimes even with parents right there, they in total trust had given their trust to an organization that was supposed to set up a system that would keep them safe and help them compete at their best. And they came to realize that this man who actually was setting up and dictating some of the policies of how to keep athletes safe in this type of situation was abusing his position and all that was going on there. From the Hollywood, we've seen it so much through the news. There have been tons of abuse stories that have come alive. And maybe you've seen the hashtag #MeToo. If you've seen that on Twitter, if you're on social media or not, or maybe you've heard about it as you've read, listened to the news, and somebody brought out someone else who has taken advantage of a position that they were in to abuse someone else. Maybe you've seen it on a paper that you've read or a website that you've visited. But from Hollywood power brokers like Harvey Weinstein to corporate CEOs to whoever, women have been coming forward to tell horrifying stories of abuse and hurt. And not only that, but as you started to see all this come out and come forward, then you started seeing actually an odd thing that men started using the #MeToo hashtag and sharing their stories that they have been abused. I remember one that really shocked me was, I don't know if anybody know who Terry Crews is. Terry Crews is a huge man. He is an action star, and I think he's done some wrestling and stuff like that. But he came out to share his story, how he had been abused. Totally breaking the stereotype that, if you're large enough and strong enough, then you're okay. How he had been abused as well. Then it took a disturbing trend even further. And this one hit more home to me, because you started seeing a hashtag that said, Church Too. And those were accompanied by stories of people who had been in a church and had someone in leadership or someone they had trusted in a church take advantage of them and abuse them sexually. That's a scary situation to be in. To even further, 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you guys have, this hit the news a lot. Maybe you've seen this. But 2 weeks ago, there was a pastor, a teaching pastor at a church in Tennessee. And he came forward and confessed to his congregation about an incident that that had happened with him. It was where he had taken advantage of a young lady about 20 years ago when he was a college intern at a church, a youth intern at a church in Texas. And the thing that was tough was that she followed him on Twitter, and there was a bunch of things about how it came about, but she kind of outed him again, and he came out and said all these things about how I did it right. I apologized to her, I apologized to her parents, I apologized to the church, I apologized to the leadership, and there's been conflict. Oh, no, you didn't. Oh, yes, you did. But realistically, the thing that's sitting there is what was scary is that you saw the church in Tennessee give him a standing ovation. Now, I firmly believe that they were looking at it as a situation. Here's somebody confessing and repenting of sin. And as we all want to do, we all want that opportunity when we have done something wrong to be confessed to the Lord and be able to be made whole. And I don't think they were in any way, applauding that act or taking advantage of someone or abuse, as some people outside the church have tried to play that out to be. I don't think that's how it was. But what it does leave us with is there's an issue in our country and in our culture. And how do we deal with that? People, how can God allow these things to happen? If we follow Christ, how in the world can anything bad happen to us, right? Shouldn't that stuff always all be over? What I want to do today is delve into this subject just a little bit, the subject of abuse, and I want to look at it from a story, from the perspective of a story in Genesis, in Genesis 39. And this is probably one of the most abused people that has been listed in Scripture. It's very, very, very similar in a multitude of ways. His name is Joseph. And basically, what Joseph had the good and the bad of it all at the same time. He was his father's favorite son, had a bunch of brothers and sisters, but his brothers hated him for it. And then if you know the story of Joseph, one time they hated him so bad that their hate kind of erupted, and they attacked him, and they beat him, and they threw him in a pit. And then what they did later was they sold him to slave traders. I know we've all had our brothers and sisters that we've been a little bit frustrated with, but has anybody ever been to the point that you really would go through with selling them to slave traders? Well, Joseph did. And they actually dipped his coat that his father gave him in blood and told his father that he died. And so this situation, so he's been sold to slave traders by his own family, by the people that he trusted. He was one of the younger brothers. So you had all the older brothers that he had looked up to that taught him how to do things. Their choice was to beat him and then sell him for money. And we pick up there in chapter 39 and verse 1. It says, when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Now, Potiphar was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. So what you see is now he's been sold to traders. Now they sold him into slavery. That carries a tough connotation for us these days. Our country has a history with that word that's ugly, and terrible, and praise God, that's over and we're trying to get past it. There's still things we're trying to heal from it, from the racial divides in our country. But it's still not fun to be purchased and owned by another person. And Joseph went from being the favorite son and the hated brother to being beaten by his family, thrown in a pit, then sold to slave traders who then sold him to a rival nation. Egypt really had a bad view of, he was a Hebrew, had a bad view of Hebrews. They were lower than low. They didn't have the same, they weren't human per se. Egyptians looked down on Hebrews. And then it continues in verse 2. It says, but the Lord was with Joseph. And that's an odd thing to say. You just got beat by your brothers. You got sold to slave traders, and they sold you to a rival nation who thinks you, just because of the race that you are, you're terrible. But the Lord was with Joseph. But the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Now Potiphar noticed this, and he realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. In verse 4, it says, and this pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. And you're like, okay, great. Things are looking up. Can you imagine if you're Joseph? My family just beat me and they sold me, and I got sold into this folks who think because I'm a Hebrew that I'm lower than human. And I got to work with this dude, and I'm just going to do the best I can. And then the Lord is with me. And all of a sudden, he makes me a personal attendant. He puts me in charge of everything, his entire household and everything else. There was nothing in the household. It said later on, it said there's, excuse me, it said there was nothing that Potiphar didn't worry about anything if Joseph was taking care of it. There was a trust factor there. So you'd think things are starting to look up, but they aren't. In verse 6, it says, it starts here, Joseph was a very handsome and a well-built young man. He was good looking. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. So he was hot and she wanted him. That's pretty much what happened. So come and sleep with me, she demanded. But Joseph refused. He said, look, he told her, he said, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. Verse 9 said, no one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you because you're my wife. You're his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. So here he is. He's trying to do the right thing by the guy who owns him and purchased him. You know, he's trying to do the right thing by God. He's trying to have integrity. But she kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day. But he refused to sleep with her. And he kept out of her way as much as possible. So he's trying to avoid her at every turn, because every day it's the same thing. You come sleep with me and I'm not going to do it. In verse 11, it says, one day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. And she came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, come on, sleep with me. And Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. So here he is. He's trying to do his work. She comes in, she grabs him. She's got him so tight. She's trying to basically physically force him to do that with everything she can. He tears himself away so much that he had to leave his cloak with her and get away. And you think, okay, man, what a great guy of integrity. God's obviously going to bless that. And then what happens? She decided to blame it on Joseph and said that he tried to rape her. And she told her husband that. He believed his wife, obviously. And then they put Joseph in prison. So he's trying to do the right thing. His family has abused him. His family has sold him. He's been sold to people who think because of his race he's horrible. He's tried to serve them with integrity and be honest and follow the Lord and do everything is right as much as he can. And he's resisted this horrible sin from this woman who has forced herself on him. And then from there, in keeping with his integrity, he gets thrown into prison for that. But here's the thing you see about Joseph. Joseph didn't stop there. He tried to be the best prisoner that he could be. In the prison, he's trying to do everything he can. And you see that he became a favorite of the warden. The warden saw everything. The Lord was, it says in the verse, the Lord was with Joseph in prison, believe it or not. He was with him, and everything he did prospered, and the prisoners responded to him, so the warden put him in charge of all the other prisoners. And there came a point in time, there were two prisoners that were in the prison. And they had a dream. They each had a dream, and they didn't know what this dream meant. One of Joseph's talents was that God had given him, was he could interpret dreams. And so they told him the dream, and he interpreted them. One of them was going to lose his life. Oops. The other guy was going to be restored to his position. And all Joseph asked was like, hey, man, since I helped you out, will you help a brother out? And when you get out, just remember me and help me get out of here, because I'm not supposed to be in here. Or basically, I don't deserve to be in here. Will you remember me and help me out? And the guy said, sure. And sure enough, almost immediately, the prophecies came true. One of them was killed. The other one was restored to his position. And I don't know about you. I would remember the guy, I think, wouldn't you? I would remember the guy that was in prison that helped me out. For some reason, this guy, it said, the scripture tells us he forgot about Joseph. So Joseph stayed in prison for many years. So here's this guy trying to do the best thing he can. The Lord's with him. He's giving him a talent. He helps this other guy out. It seems like everybody that he trusts, everybody that he tries to help out, everyone that he reaches out to ends up screwing him over, basically is what happened. And mess him over. And here he is in prison. Now, if you know the story of Joseph, after all this abuse, at some point, years later, the guy did actually finally remember Joseph, and the Pharaoh had a dream. Nobody could interpret it. All his guys, those wise men, his magicians couldn't figure it out. The guy was a cupbearer of the king. He said, okay, hey, I remember. He had an office for Pharaoh, and he said, hey, there's Let's say there's this dude in prison. He really helped me out. He told me all about this, and he shared it with him, and the Pharaoh came to him, and Joseph interpreted his dream, which basically the interpretation of the dream is, hey, there's going to be 7 years where you're going to have, you guys are going to produce like crazy. Your crops are going to be awesome, amazing, and beautiful. And then, but right after that, there's going to be 7 years of nothing. So you better save up for 7 years. And what Pharaoh said, and God impressed upon Pharaoh, he said, look, I'm going to put you in charge of this whole effort. For the next 7 years, you are in charge. You're second in command in the whole country, second only to Pharaoh. Wow. You go from the worst of the worst to being the top of the top, and God puts him in charge of that. And so he begins to organize all of these things. And what a great leader he must have been. And God must have been with him in his leadership. So he organizes this country. They save up all this stuff. They're bringing all these crops, and they become the center that everybody comes to buy food over the next 7 years. After those 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine, they become the center that everyone comes to. He's basically saving the world. Now, there's a few things about this situation. Now, this story, I want you to understand a few things about trouble and pain and abuse, okay? Now, the first thing I want you to understand is this. There's always going to be trouble as long as you're in the world. There's always going to be something. I wish I could tell you that once you accepted Christ, everything would be perfect from there on out. But I cannot tell you that because that's not true. I cannot tell you that there won't be things that hurt you and that damage you. You know, in verse John 16:33, Jesus tells you this. I've told you many things. He told the disciples a bunch of things. He says, I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. Now, trouble, pain, abuse, all these things that degrade people, racism, hatred, jealousy, all of those things, those are a product of one thing. They all stem back to one thing. And that's sin in the heart of humans. And as long as there is sin in the world, and what that is basically people who choose to go away from what God has told them to do, that abuse, pain, all that stuff, every hurt you've ever had has come from sin in the heart of people. Everything. And its effect on this world. Every time you can't trust someone, it's because you've been hurt, because of what someone else did or the way you did things or what someone did somewhere has hurt you, and you can't trust somebody else. That's not how God meant for it to be. But because of sin, that's what we have. You know, and now do we throw our hands up? Do we say, oh, well, shoot, you know, fine, everything's going to be terrible, so let's just all sit around and mope and whine and all this stuff? No, that's not what we do. Well, do we just rake it under the rug and pretend it never happened and paste a smile on our face about the stuff? No, that's not what we're supposed to do at all. You know? But the second thing to understand is because the truth is this. We still seek justice. We still need to protect people who are weaker than us. We still need to protect people who are in vulnerable positions. And that's sometimes a vulnerable position is not about your weakness. It's just about the position that you're in. And we need to be looking and on the lookout to protect and to help in those situations, because there is no place for abuse in the church. There's no place for it. Among the body of Christ, there is absolutely zero place for that. That shouldn't be happening. You know, one, it's hiding, and what you've seen a lot of times, that even in the situation with the church in Texas, one of the accusations they made about the guy in Tennessee that served in Texas was the church kind of swept it under the rug. And I'm sure in their mind they're thinking, we're protecting God's church from scandal. We're protecting something. I'm going to tell you something. Hiding abuse doesn't protect anything. It absolutely does not. All it does is allow it to fester and to continue going on. It only allows it to rot from the inside unchecked. You know, it's not an example of following Jesus. Abuse is when someone takes the power that they have and they use it against someone for their own good to the detriment of another person. That is so anti-Jesus. What did Jesus do? Jesus had all the power in the world, and he willingly put himself on the cross to save each and every one of us, whether we would believe or not, whether we would care or not, to give us an option, to give us a choice that we might follow him, to open that door. Regardless of what people said about him, what people did to him, You know, Joseph is actually an early figure of what people project what Jesus to be. There's a correlation and tie there. And Jesus was also a man who was of many sorrows, abused and beaten and not given what he deserved. But he chose in his power to lay his life down for others. That's what we do for others. That's what we do. That's how we follow Christ. It doesn't honor God at all. Abuse is in no way honors the Lord. There's no place for that. You know, there's a verse in Philippians 2:3. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves." Every time that someone abuses someone else, they break that verse in half. Because when you abuse someone else, you are valuing your needs and your stuff above that person that you're taking to incur abuse over. There's no place for it. Every time that you abuse your position or power of another person, you violate this verse. Abuse of power over another is for the benefit of the abuser, not the abused. The worst abusers can actually talk themselves into believing that they're doing something beneficial for the other person, but that's a lie. You know, Matthew 25:40 says this. It says, "The king will reply," it says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." How we treat others speaks to how we feel about the Lord. Because God's saying, look, I'm hooking the way you treat other people to how you treat me. That's how serious I am about it. Because the truth is this, every person that you have ever seen, every person that you have ever had the privilege of knowing or the non-privilege of knowing, even if you didn't like them, they've been made in the image of God. And simply being made in the image of God gives them a level of respect that requires us to treat people kindly, that requires us to value other people. And the sin that is in our hearts and the sin that is in the hearts of all people is working desperately to get you to choose not to do that and to act selfishly and to act against other people. And we've seen people in church. It's not just the hashtag church too, not just from that type of abuse, but we've seen people who have been hurt in the church and they have left and they've not come back. Our response cannot be to abuse. Now, here's one of the things that's interesting. One of the most interesting things about the story of Joseph is Joseph himself. In every way you can say, he was a survivor. I mean, I don't see how any way you can't put that tag on him at all. At every juncture, not only was he surviving and staying around and ultimately achieving, or God brought him to a place to achieve. But at every juncture, when you think someone would just give up on humanity, give up on himself, give up on God, Joseph didn't. And that's one of the most amazing things about him. You don't see him give in to bitterness or anger. He survived. But not only that, in the midst of all this abuse, somehow, at every turn, he thrived. Everywhere you saw him, what did you see? The Lord was with Joseph, and he was the best there was in that area. And everybody went, wow, you're amazing. We're going to put you in charge of something. It's unbelievable. How do you have the fortitude to do that? I know when I've had times in my life where people have not been kind to me and have been I haven't experienced some things that some people have, but there's other things that I have. And at those times, you begin to tie your circumstance to your worth, and you think you're unworthy because of how you're being treated by this other person. You begin to believe that. And you don't want to do anything. And depression is just around the corner at those moments. But Joseph, for somehow, how did he not give in to that? It's unbelievable. Now, here's some observations about Joseph that I think is key for him and for us in moving forward. I think it's the way that he was able to move forward. And I'm going to be honest, I think one thing we need to remember is something that we have a God who can work in all kinds of situations and can resurrect and redeem. And one of the things that I see in Joseph is Joseph had a kingdom-driven vision, not a circumstance-driven vision for his life. So often, we allow the circumstance that we're in to define the worth that we are. And that is not true. I'm going to give you one thing that defines your worth, and it's the same for everyone. Jesus chose to die for you And that makes you worth something. You understand that? If Jesus, the God of the universe, felt that it was worth him coming and putting up with the beatings and the disrespect and all the things he did to leave the comforts of heaven and to come down to earth and condescend to go through the worst of the worst, to be a guy who didn't even have a place to lay his head, the one who owned everything, to have nothing, to do it because you're worthy and because I'm worthy of his love. We're not in and of our own self, but because his love is so great, he made us worthy. And worth has been assigned to who you are. So you can't become a circumstance-driven person. You know, someone thinks we begin to think someone thinks very little of me, so I'm not worthy. But the truth is, because Jesus died for us, we have been given worth that no one can ever take away. We can deny it. We can ignore it. We can try to think another way, but the truth is God has given you worth that is immense and valuable. At any moment, in any circumstance, you can achieve victory and success based on the only criteria that matters. Do you realize that? In every circumstance that you have, I don't care how bad it is, how horrible it is, there is a place for you to go to achieve success on the only scale that matters. You can honor God in the midst of it. We see that in Joseph. At every place. You know, this is what I thought. At every moment, he could have gone and done something about it. You think about when he got to be king. You know, he wasn't really king, but second in command. I don't know about you, but I want to drive him back over to somebody's house for a bit with a few chariots and stuff like that and have a little chat, wouldn't you? I kind of want to do that. Show up in somebody's yard one day unannounced with about 15 warriors behind me and just kind of like, you know what you want to do. You want to get a little vengeance on that, but you don't see that in him. Our circumstances don't determine our success or failure or worth. What Joseph trusted not only in the power of God, but in the wisdom of God as well. Now I want you to look at Joseph. Later on, when he's his second in command, his brothers came to him for food. Later, you can read this. His brothers, the ones who beat him up and sold him, and then told his dad that he died. So I don't know if he knew it exactly at that moment. He may find that out later. We knew it because it tells it in the story. But he comes and they're in front of him. And he reveals himself to them. And they bow down in front of him. They're like, oh, we're sorry. We'll be your slaves. Don't kill us. Because now they realize he's got all the power. And what did he say? I think it's beautiful. What he says, it shows where Joseph's mind was. In Genesis 50, verse 20, it says, he tells them this. He said, look, you intended to harm me. But God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. That takes a big man, even if you believe that. That takes someone with a mind that is in a different place than where I end up being so often. I'm just going to be honest with you. I can be a very vindictive person. I can. I don't know about you, but I can. And somebody hurts my feelings, I can get petty really fast. You know, if the Holy Spirit is not really working overtime to keep me in the right mind, I can be the biggest jerk that you have ever seen. And probably you'll look at it sometimes. If you hang around with me long enough, you'll see it, and you'll go, wow, I thought he was a pastor. Okay. I'm a human guy too. And God's still working on me. It used to be a whole lot worse. Be thankful for that. But... But one of the things, there's a song we sing, and we sang it last week, and one of the lines really comes to me, and when I think about something, it says, thank you for the scars I bear, because they declare that you are my healer. Do you realize that in any situation that you're in, Joseph trusted, not only the power of God, but the wisdom of God. He realized that no matter what situation I can get in, God can heal me from that. If I trust him, here's something that I want you to understand too. Sometimes what we see as persecution and punishment, sometimes it's just God positioning you. Now that takes a lot of trust, because I know persecution and positioning hurt. They hurt a lot sometimes. But that's what Joseph saw it as. Yeah, you beat me up. Yeah, you threw me in a pit. Yeah, maybe you sold me, and then they sold me to a slavery, and this lady tried to sexually assault me, and I was good, and they threw me in prison for it, and all the guys that I helped forgot about me. You didn't see that. You'll hear him tell that story. He goes, look, God, you meant it for bad. I get that. But God meant it for good. One of the things about Joseph is that what you see is you never see Joseph as bitter. That's amazing to me. I don't see how you couldn't be in that situation. When we're abused or hurt, we react in a number of ways. One, we can suppress it. We can act as if it never happened. That's not Joseph. He looked right at him and said, look, you meant it to be bad, but it's okay. It's all good. God meant for it to be good. And so I could save the lives of a bunch of people. And if you read that story, you read the way he interacted with his brothers, he gigged them a little bit, but he was pretty much a very gracious guy that brought all the family to live with him in a great place and took care of them during this time of famine. We can suppress it. Here's another thing we can do. Sometimes we seek reciprocity. We seek justice. I'm going to do to you what you did to me. I want to even out the score. I want to bring some sort of balance to the scales, that makes it all right again. Now, Proverbs 21:15 tells us that justice does bring joy to the righteous. So justice is not a bad desire to have. The problem is you have to know who to get it from. We know that from James 4:12 that God is the one only true judge. Proverbs 7:11 tells us that he's a righteous God. He's a righteous God, which means that he's the only one who can judge in such a manner or bring justice in such a manner that the scales are balanced again. I can't do that. I can't set up, if you wrong me, I can't set up a scenario to which I balance the scales of justice once again. Usually what I do when I try to balance the scales of justice is I go too far or I go too little. And I carry either guilt or I don't think enough has been done. Very rarely does everyone think that it's balanced even, but I will tell you there is a God who can and a God who does. And he said, look, you leave that to me. We know from Ecclesiastes 3:17 that he will judge every evil deed. There's a time for that and it will come. And you can guarantee that in your heart of hearts, regardless of whoever's wronged you or hurt you, or if you've wronged someone, there is a time coming. And God will judge all those evil deeds. Here's the third thing we try to do. We try to seek revenge. We lash out at someone. We hurt the ones who hurt us, and we try to take back power over them. But you don't see any of that in Joseph. I told you, I said I would take my chariots and show up at Potiphar's house. And I would call that woman out, and I would make her tell me the truth on pain of death. That would be me. I would take my power back for what this lady did to me. But that you never hear of him interacting at all with her again or with Potiphar because he moved on. And I'm going to tell you, one of the biggest things that you can choose anytime that you've been hurt, abused, or something has gone wrong in your life and you have a legitimate grievance. Now, I'm not talking about just crazy stuff. I'm talking about stuff that, I'm not talking about stuff that, is optional. I'm talking about stuff that really hurts. We all have that. And I've told you before, if we set up a mic and we came and let you share what someone did to you, we would probably all want to get a stick and go beat the fire out of them right now. We probably would. And I'd be right there with you. But I'm going to tell you something. At every point in turn, when you realize that we are in an imperfect world where it is impossible for us to make right justice on our own without the help of an almighty God, you have one or two choices. You can become bitter or you can become better. And what you see from Joseph is he chose to become better. And I'm going to give you a secret of how he did it. You may not want to hear it. He forgave. You don't stand in front of your brothers who beat you up and sold you into slavery and say, no, you meant it for bad, but it's okay. God meant it for good. Hey, here's the best land in the world. Why don't you guys come live over here with my stuff? I'm going to take care of you, make sure you got food. You don't do that stuff. When you become the most powerful person in the room, you turn around and you go back to Potiphar's wife and you take it out on them because they did it to you. The way you don't is that you forgave. And you might look at me, come on, man. His brothers, they hunk and beat him and sold him as a slave. I mean, the woman tried to rape him and then sent him to prison for it and lied about him and messed up his character, ruined his name. After all he had done in their home, and that's what you think about. He had worked as hard as he could to make their home the best home that he could be. He'd served well at every point. In fact, he acted with complete integrity, and his boss threw him to the wolves and out in the cold. And when he was in prison, he helped the ingrates, and they forgot about him, and they couldn't even remember his name. How could he move on? How could he continue to be better and not be bitter? And the answer is that he forgave. Now, probably right now, you're thinking about somebody in your life, and you're going, you know what? Yeah, I know, that came to me. But Jim, if you knew, they don't deserve forgiveness. They did this, I did everything I could. They were the most horrible person to me. They don't deserve forgiveness. And I'm going to tell you something. Anyone that you have to forgive does not deserve forgiveness, or you would not have to forgive them. You would have nothing to forgive them of. Do you understand that? The only way that someone deserves forgiveness is if they never did anything wrong in the first place. At every point, it's a choice for us. Are we going to forgive, or are we going to move forward? God said so much. He said, the way you forgive others is the way that I will forgive you. And he hooked those things together for us. Ephesians 4:11 and 12, it tells us to forgive as Christ forgave you. You may say, but that's only for people who really deserve it. As I said, no one does. No one deserves forgiveness. If they deserved it, they wouldn't need it. If you deserve forgiveness, you wouldn't need it. But God gives it freely. And here's the thing. You may say, hey man, look, if I forgive them, I'm letting them off the hook. They need to be put down. They need to know how bad it felt. And I'm going to tell you something. You're not letting them off the hook when you forgive them. You're letting yourself off the hook. There are people that don't live in this town anymore. And they've hurt you, and they've abused you, and they live somewhere else across the sea or states away. And they don't care, and they've moved on, and all this stuff, and you're holding that in your heart. You know who is being hurt by your lack of forgiveness? It's you. Because you're not hurting them. You're the one who can't trust. You're the one who's having problems. You're the one that it's tearing you up inside. And the reason that God ties forgiveness to how you forgive others is how he forgives you, is because he wants you to know that it's seriously that important for your own personal health that you learn to move past and let it go. And you have to trust him with a God-sized vision that at some point God is going to balance the scales. At some point God is going to take care of it. Does that mean that you just pretend it never happened? No. If you've been abused, you need to speak up about that. Because chances are if they did it to you, they're going to do it to somebody else. And we have to stop that. We have to step forward on those things. But you don't make that act and that moment define you. You honor the Lord in those moments. If you are the abuser, you need to fess up. You need to seek forgiveness. You need to make retribution wherever it is possible. That's on you. If we're protecting abuse, we need to wise up. Protecting abuse protects nothing. It only allows it to grow. We need to step forward in that. If you're a prisoner of abuse, I feel for you. I know you may not want to hear this, but it is time to forgive it and let it go for your sake. That doesn't mean that justice doesn't need to be sought. It doesn't mean that those steps don't need to be done to protect yourself or protect other people. It doesn't mean you just paint a smile on your face and you say, oh, that's fine. You did it to me. Knock yourself out. No. But there needs to be something where you let go of in your heart so that you can move on and you're not continually tied to that moment in time in your history. And you can never get but only so far away as the chain that ties you to it. You need to let it go. Now I'm going to ask the band to come back up. I know this is a difficult message today. I realize, I do, that there are people in here, and I don't know. I know some, I don't know all. But you're dealing with a tough situation of abuse from your past, from things that you maybe never told anyone. And when I ask you to forgive, it probably ticked you off. I understand that. I wish it was a different way. But I know that God has the best way. I know that He has the right way. And when He says to forgive, I have to trust it regardless of what my circumstance is. I have people in my past that have fired me from jobs that I felt like was unfair, who have blamed me for things that were not mine, who have accused me and ruined me, my name at times, but I can't, if I hold that against them, I'm never going to get away from that, and I'm always going to be devoting energy to punishing them somewhere by talking into a shower head or yelling as I drive down the street. It's time to let it go. For my sake and for the sake of people moving forward. And it's the same for you. So I'm going to ask our prayer team if they'll stand at the back. If you're having a tough time and there's a situation, maybe you didn't want to say what it is, but you just need somebody to pray for you. Our band's going to sing. And as they begin to sing, just make your way to the back. Be as anonymous about it as you want or as detailed as you want, but ask them to pray for you, and they will. And try to let it go and be a survivor like Joseph was. If you'd stand with us and sing.
Thanks for being a part of Bay West today. Bay West Church meets at 100 Emerson Road in Palm Bay at 11 a.m. on Sundays. Please feel free to check us out at baywestchurch.org, or you can follow us on Facebook at Bay West Church.